Welcome to the intersection of city politics and everyday life. I'm Brian Lehrer. The tragic loss of 17 lives at a high school in Parkland, Florida, left us brokenhearted and afraid, too. Have we just been lucky that a mass killing hasn't yet happened in a New York City school? Since Sandy Hook 6 years ago, more than 400 people have been shot in over 200 schools nationwide, but none here in New York City since 2002. Is there something different about our city, our schools, versus suburban towns like Sandy Hook or Newtown, Connecticut, and Parkland, Florida, and the Columbine area in Colorado that makes such a massacre less likely here? Maybe it's the security measures already in our schools, plus the psychological support services and our strict gun laws. Or is all that wishful thinking? We'll discuss this in a minute. But first, let's not fail to say that the brave activist response of so many Parkland students and families has also left us hopeful and inspired, and they've already been effective. Today, semi-automatic rifles like the one used in Parkland got harder to obtain nationwide as Dick's Sporting Goods, with 610 stores in 47 states, stopped selling assault-style rifles that have been available in its Field and Stream stores. Nor will Dick's any longer sell high-capacity magazines or any gun to anyone under 21, regardless of local laws. This morning, Dick's chair and CEO, Edward Stack, told ABC's George Stephanopoulos that he was so upset by Parkland, he needed to do something.
When we take a look at what those kids and the parents and the heroes in the school, what they did, and our view was if the kids can be brave enough to organize like this, we can be brave enough to take these out of here.
CEO, inspired by the Never Again movement, but by self-interest too. Edward Stack had learned that the Parkland shooter had bought a shotgun from one of his sporting goods stores back in November. Not the automatic weapon used in the killings, but still the ease of purchase seems to have convinced Stack that current gun laws were inadequate to keep his business from being implicated, maybe in the next mass killing. Back to New York. Our state already bans the sale of assault weapons, but there are plenty of other guns around to endanger young people here. In fact, last year, a quarter of the 290 homicide victims here in New York City were between the ages of 15 and 24 years old. Most died from gun violence. And remember, there are far more shootings than deaths. So what can be done to insulate our schools, our kids, from gun violence and prevent a massacre? To help us think about these questions, we have two special guests. Eric Adams, the borough president of Brooklyn. He knows the mean streets. For 22 years, he was an officer in the NYPD. He co-founded the advocacy group, 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. And he knows Albany, too, having been a state senator representing Brooklyn neighborhoods from Brownsville to Sunset Park. We are also honored to have Michael Mulgrew at our table. He is president of the United Federation of Teachers, which represents 200,000 or so teachers, nurses, and staff working in our city's public schools, as well as retirees, childcare workers, and others. He knows maybe not the mean streets, but the noisy hallways, and firsthand. He taught high school for 12 years in Brooklyn and was a leading proponent of the Community Learning Schools initiative, which brings psychological and medical services to schools. Welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for coming in together.
Thank you, Brian.
Michael, Eric, first of all, it hasn't happened here. Can it happen here?
I think, yes, it's possible. And I believe that, you know, as some people say, it was luck, and I don't think it was luck. I think that the communication and coordination between the school safety officers and the New York City Police Department is amazing. And I remember as a police officer, one of the most challenging calls of duties you can do is around schools. You know, the job that teachers do every day and school safety officers do every day of managing, you know, encounters without having to use a firearm is just something that we cannot overlook.
Let me stay with you for a second, because you talked about the school safety officer. That's an NYPD personnel individual in every school, but not armed?
No, not armed. Years ago, under Commissioner Kelly, what I believe we should have done and should do is allow school safety officers, after 2 years of being in the school, that they can automatically go into the New York City Police Department. If you can show that level of discipline as a school safety officer without using a level of force that you would see across the country, you are ready to patrol any street. If you could patrol our school system with hormone young people without any violence, you're ready for any street.
So those people have not gone through the police academy?
They go through their own form of training, but they don't go through the same level of police academy that a police officer would go through. But they go through the same training. They're under the same administration in the New York City Police Department. And I see it as the minor league of policing. And then after 2 years, you should be able to move up because you really have the ability to do so.
Interesting. So do either of you think, Michael, do you think that those school security officers should be armed? Because that's part of the national debate now. We also have a state senator from Brooklyn, Republican Howard Golden, who's proposing that there be an armed officer in the schools in New York. Would that add safety, in your opinion, for your members, your teachers, as well as students?
We do not believe that putting guns, more guns inside of a school would be the proper response to any of this. In New York City, we're always vigilant. We're always we're communicating constantly. Every school building has a monthly security meeting. But the school safety personnel right now, they are part of the NYPD structure. So the communication, they are inside of the NYPD communication infrastructure. So there's constant communication every day going on between those personnel and NYPD who are out in the field patrolling their neighborhoods. So if anything does happen, you will see a very quick and aggressive response inside of any of our schools.
By an unarmed school safety officer whose recourse is to radio for actual armed backup.
In many schools, there's multiple school safety officers. But when your original question is, could it happen here in New York? Clearly, it could happen anywhere. If you have a highly motivated individual, somebody who's having mental distress and other things, and they're highly motivated, in New York City, there's been so much coordination in terms of not just security personnel, but the ability to spot a student who is in distress, who has his problems, and how do we get to them before they get to that point where they've made a horrendous decision in their life. And that has a lot to do with what's happened here. But we're constantly, because of what just happened in Parkland, we're constantly on the lookout to see if there's anything troubling signs out there. And then as adults, you have to make sure that you're not sweeping those signs under the rug.
So you're saying mental health. The president and a lot of Republicans want to distract attention from the gun piece of the debate and focus only on mental health and other things. But you're saying that you think that mental health services in New York City are particularly good, and that's one of the prevention pieces.
I believe it's part of one of the prevention pieces. I'll always say it can get better. Because I'm a huge proponent that the earlier you can recognize that a child's having distress, the better off. If we can get those interventions then, that's why I'm a proponent of community learning schools, because if we can get a child who we recognize early in first, second, or third grade, then we don't have to worry about them when they're getting into the high school age. We've already dealt with their issues to a large degree.
And one more question for you on this. Some say it kind of got worse. There were psychological services, then they diminished.
It's true.
That this current mayor's wife, Shirlane McCray, mental health is her big thing as an issue, that she helped spearhead re-improving, if that's a word, mental health services in the schools. Is that your experience?
Yeah, there's a much greater focus on mental health. This is something we believe in both in our community learning school model. We've seen that every school, no matter where it is, what zip code it is, mental health is a service that they need. And we also have a specific program called Positive Learning Collaborative Schools. And in those schools, we've actually been able to get the rate of suspension down to a very low number, but we've also been able to recognize that there's a small percentage of students who need what is known as a clinical intervention. And right now, we'll continue to focus on that piece, because if we know we're recognizing children who need clinical intervention, we want the school to be able to give that to them. But the focus in New York City of not shying away from the fact that there is mental health is a real issue that should be spoken about openly, that has definitely helped us here in New York City.
Let's hear a couple of the student voices from a meeting of high school students, parents, and youth leaders that our guest, Eric Adams, hosted in Brooklyn's Borough Hall last Thursday. Of course, that was just one short week and a day after the shooting in Parkland. Would you set this video up for us?
Yeah, it was my concern. Really, I think this is a youth movement, and the energy of the young people is going to really change the direction. And, you know, history has shown us the young people have always had the lung capacity to blow the globe in the direction that they want. And I really wanted to hear their voices. And it is amazing how they are astute, articulate, and they are ready to change this issue.
Let's watch and listen to a couple of those kids.
When the bullet went off in Parkland, I felt it. And I believe many people in New York City felt it. Many people in the nation felt it. No matter how many federal agents or NYPD officers we deploy at our schools, we are the first line of defense. We see our peers and we observe them. We like their Instagram photos. So it is totally up to the youth to observe and report. And I believe that together, if we partner up, we can do a lot and we can fix this issue because it is totally up to us.
Right now, we're at a unique moment in American history. We have a movement comprised of young people, and they need to be listened to. And we need to lower the voting age. We need to incorporate civics into government education, and we need to lobby for a national ban on assault weapons. When they had the 10-year ban on assault weapons, violence went down. We need to bring that back, and we need to have the young people leading this charge. Because as my friend said earlier, we are the first line of defense, and we cannot be killed anymore. We cannot have our friends and our family members and our peers be shot down because we're not represented and not heard in our government.
All right, some good Brooklyn kids.
Yes, no, and real powerful conversation. And it's doing something else that I think is important. This issue is a rural issue and an urban issue. And there's been a level of expediency when we see the rural aspect of it. Even here in this state, which we have good gun laws, but we saw the desire to change gun laws when there was a mass shooting in a rural area of the country. Governor Cuomo and others pushed through legislation. And I remember being in Albany and it said, what are we doing about the 9mm? That's the urban issue. And so if we satisfy the ban on assault weapons and stop people from going into schools with those automatic weapons and ignore the fact that according to the definition I got, mass shooting is 3 or more. We have a lot of 3 or more mass shootings taking place every day in the urban cities. That is the focus. This is a gun issue. It's not an issue about what type of gun you carry. It's not an issue about if a deranged person walk into a school, because you can solve those entities, but if you're not looking at the problem that we have an over-proliferation of guns and we are attached to those guns. The southern states are legally having these guns transported up here to the northern states, the Philadelphias, the New Yorks. That's what we have to deal with. And one more piece is very important. When I was in the Senate, I purchased an automatic weapon. You had to see this gun, Michael. It was unbelievable. And you can walk that weapon, although New York City laws are stringent. New York, once you leave New York City, it's a different game. You go to the Yonkers, Westchester, I was able to walk that automatic weapon all the way down Broadway, and I could go right into the Bronx, into Manhattan. So we have to look at the entire state. You know, when we talk about banning weapons, we can start right here in this state, not only what happens across the country.
But even when you, but right now what's going on in Florida with the Parkland students, they're basically saying, we want people to work with us because we're willing to get into that fight straight up with the NRA.
Right.
You know, because you just said we could solve this. Well, in many places you can't. Right now in Florida, if you're mentally ill, you can go buy an AK-47. Because the NRA is telling everyone that if you do anything that we don't like, we're going to take you out in your next election. So we can't even solve that as a nation because of the fear that politicians have against the NRA. So to me, this is a moment now with the youth leading the way, because we've been outspoken for years, my union. We've been anti-NRA, we've gotten into fights with them. We disinvested in all gun manufacturing, ammunition manufacturing years ago because of their policies. And at this moment, what these students from Parkland and what we just heard from Brooklyn are saying is, join with us. Let's have this fight straight up with this lobbying group who is controlling the political process as it pertains to guns and violence in our country.
So I can assume from that you and most of your teacher members are not on board with the president's position that if we had more armed teachers, not to require any teacher, but those who want to do it, he said if we had some kind of critical mass, like 20% of teachers armed, then there won't be any more school mass shootings, or there won't be many, because those prospective shooters will know what they would be walking into. Your reaction?
When it comes to this idea, it's not that it's stupid, it's how stupid is it, as far as I'm concerned. Okay? And it also is a deflection from him not wanting to take on the National Rifle Association. He is trying to deflect from the fact that he's not willing to get into a fight with this lobbying firm.
Why is it wrong on the merits?
The facts are simple. When you introduce more guns into an environment, you get more violence, okay? And teachers are trained in lesson plans, in marking, in classroom management, not marksmanship. And the whole idea of saying that we're not willing to, as a society, to take on this group of lobbyists and say, we're not going to allow this to happen anymore, and we're not going to then pass an idea that says even more guns get unleashed inside of our schools is absurd.
With your experience as a police officer, I'm thinking of a few scenarios.
Yes.
Get your expertise on. Somebody like the shooter in Parkland comes in with something like an AR-15. You have a teacher or two in the school at their desk with a little handgun in their desk. What happens in the next minute?
Right. This is not the movie. It's not Die Hard 1, 2, and 3 and Lethal Weapons. We automatically, bad guy comes in with an automatic weapon. You have a 38 6-shooter, and you're going to go for it and save the day. That is not the reality. First of all, when you're under that level of stress, if your training doesn't kick in, that you have spent months on learning how and retrain, you're not going to respond appropriately just to start with. And so to arm individuals who are not there to do that form of service is a very dangerous environment. And once a bullet leaves the barrel of the gun, it does not discriminate, you know. It's not point and shoot. It's just not that simple. And the president, in his unrealistic view and try to simplify a very complicated encounter, is sending out the wrong message. And I hope people don't start to say, yes, let's put more guns in our school buildings.
And to Michael's point that more guns equals more violence, just before we went on, there was a news story out of Georgia, and it's not all confirmed yet, but it appears to be that there was a shooting in a high school in Georgia. Nobody got shot, but a teacher apparently discharged a gun and barricaded himself in the room, and then he was taken into custody by police. To me, that's an indication that in any population, a certain percentage of the people will go off for whatever reason. So it could be that if there were a lot more guns in schools, we would actually have more school shootings than we do now, because there would be more guns around. Is that your opinion?
I believe so. And not only that, the emotional strains of life, when we look at the number of students who are now participating in depression is becoming the top diagnosis in our country. You have 3 officers in the last few months who committed suicide, who they also had guns.
A third of the gun deaths in the country are suicides.
Exactly. An accidental shooting, your accidental discharge. And so the more guns you put in an environment, you increase the level of those form of shootings.
Just the idea of saying we're going to put guns, loaded guns, inside of school buildings. How are you going to secure them? You know, oh, we're going to put them in a lockbox, and then what happens if a shooter comes in? This is just a debate that just is a non-starter as far as we are concerned. It's absurd. And the fact that people would rather have that debate than say, let's start with some simple things.
Right.
If you have a violent past, you're not getting a gun. If you're having mental issues right now and it's diagnosed and you're going through that, you don't have access to a gun. You don't hear the president standing up saying that. You hear them saying, oh, my response is, let's put more guns inside of schools where we have a whole bunch of students.
Do we have the opposite problem in New York City? Because sometimes I hear people complain that the schools feel like jails because there are so many high schools with medical detectors, especially in with what did I say, metal detectors.
Right.
And so
we knew what you meant.
Right.
it would be nice if we could detect medical problems and take care of them. But metal detectors, and so some parents, some kids, some communities feel like there's a criminalization, especially of black and brown teenagers, taking place as a means of prevention.
You know, I'm a believer that the first order of business is public safety. And you have to do a real analysis of what is it going to take to create an environment that people are going to be safe. And if the NYPD carries out an analysis that due to a level of violence, knives or carrying guns to school, et cetera, if they do an analysis and say at this place we need to have a metal detector, I support that. I would love for my son not to have to go to a school with a metal detector. I would love for him not to have to get on an airplane with a metal detector. But the reality is we're living in a society where those who we hire to serve and protect us need to do an analysis and say this is what needs to be done.
We have about 90 permanent metal detector schools in the city. When I taught, my school went from being a non-metal detector school to a metal detector school, because of gun issues, because I taught in a school where kids came from different parts of the city. It was not a zone school, and there were children from different gangs involved. At first it was tough. We had a difficulty with it as a staff as well as the students, but then we realized there also was a level of feeling more secure and getting back more to that this school is a safe zone, as we always thought it was. But it was done by talking with NYPD, with the Department of Education, with the parent leaders in the building, having a conversation. And I agree with what Eric just said. We wish we lived in a society where we didn't have to do this. But the reality is we want to make sure that in New York City we continue to have a record of not having these issues, because that's the worst thing that could ever happen.
In fact, to that point, I wonder how you both feel about society's biggest problems being lumped on teachers and on, not on borough presidents, sometimes on borough presidents, but on police officers. I remember the police chief of Dallas after the incident there, who was so eloquent, speaking to the nation, we're putting too much on the cops. If we have poverty, put it on the cops. If we have inequality, put it on the cops. You could say the same exact thing about teachers.
Yeah, it is exactly the same thing. And now we have a leader of the country saying that we want to arm you, and you're now responsible for dealing with the fact that we don't have the courage to stand up to a lobbying group.
And I think that when you, by the time little Bobby gets inside a classroom, if all that teacher had to do was to teach 1 and 1 equals 2, it's a walk in the park. But Bobby gets there, sometimes he came from a homeless shelter. Sometimes he just saw his parents in a domestic violence dispute. Sometimes he or she's had to sleep with her coat on so she won't be sexually abused by the male members of a household. All of those problems is sitting in that classroom. That teacher must analyze that problem and see, how do I teach this young person that feels broken? How do I put him back together so he can teach? I think we need to use teachers in a manner to assist in telling us what are the wraparound services we need for little Bobby. This way we could do our job as a teacher.
We have a few minutes left. I want to use them to talk about what's coming up. First of all, on March 14th, Wednesday, March 14th, there's going to be a nationwide, and I gather New York City kids will be participating, 17-minute school walkout in honor of the 17 people who were killed at the high school in Parkland. Mayor de Blasio has already said if he was a teenager today, he'd be joining that walkout. I don't know if that condones a little bit of absenteeism. What do you say?
We are very big believers that people should take the responsible acts to make sure that they are working together to change society. I am sure, as I have great faith in all of the teachers and staffs at the school, that they'll make sure that the kids, their students, will be safe that day. But I have no doubts.
Communication with teachers?
I have got many members who have reached out, and we're just saying whatever your school community chooses to do Just make sure, first and foremost, that you are coordinating to make sure that the students remain safe, that whatever they're doing is being done in a responsible way.
And we're going to try to have a large rally at Prospect Park with the young people, and we also
after school that day.
And we're going to sponsor buses for those who want to go to Washington. And this is what education is.
Let me jump in, because we're going to run out of time, and I want to make sure we're talking about one thing and not two things. Because there's the March 14th, Wednesday, 17-minute walkout.
Yes.
Right.
Then there's the Saturday, March 24th, DC march against gun violence, but also, I think, regional marches in cities across the country. Is there going to be something that day in Brooklyn?
Yes, we're going to participate in the walkout. We're going to sponsor buses for the Washington March, and we're going to do something in Brooklyn, probably down at Borough Hall, for those who don't want to go to DC.
Right. And you're anticipating a big thing in Manhattan also. I realize it's not, you have to run Brooklyn. But
we'll come together.
Yeah.
We'll come together. We're all on the same page with this. And if we want to if folks want to continue from Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, to come together, all the borough presidents, we're all together on this.
Okay.
We've already had schools reach out to us for going to Washington, D.C., and we said we'd be more than happy to support them. And because in the end, right now, what they're talking about, Washington, D.C. is not going to solve this. They want to cut billions of dollars education funding, yet at the same time, you have a president saying, let's put billions of dollars worth of guns inside of our schools. It's just absurd.
Right. So there'll be a D.C. march. Sounds like you're sending buses. There may also, we'll see the size of it, a New York adjunct to that march. Like in January, the anniversary of the first Women's March.
Right.
There was a big one down there. There was a big one here as well. Now, you're just back from Florida. This is an interesting part of your job.
Yeah.
Florida, I would probably call the New York City retired teachers' capital of the world.
You would probably be correct in saying that. Yes.
But what's the role of the union there still at this point, as it relates to this issue?
So the majority of our retirees are right in the section of Florida near Parkland. And they were outraged about it. So I flew down yesterday. They organized a meeting. It was one of the largest meetings we've ever had down there. And their issues were about what can we do to help what these students are doing. We've been fighting this for years. Every time there is a shooting in a school, every teacher across the United States feels it, feels out the fear and goes through what would they do. And they said these kids are standing up and saying, we've had it. And we want to be there with them. How can we coordinate here in the state of Florida to deal with the elected officials who are afraid and continue to back down against what their communities want, which is safe, common sense gun control laws.
I think your office gave us the number, 13,000 retired New York City teachers living in Florida.
It's quite a number.
Where do the retired cops go?
Same place.
Same place.
Get married, in Florida.
Well, thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Great to hear from both
Thank
the
you, Brian.
teacher's side and the Brooklyn side, and past with your past police officer experience as well. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
reporting.
Always good seeing you.
Thank you.
And that's our program for today. We're here at this hour each week, midweek, at the intersection of city politics and everyday life. Until next week, consider tuning into my radio program weekdays 10 a.m. to noon on WNYC, 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow and Friday, we'll cover the fast-moving developments in the Russia investigation with former Brooklyn Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman and Nixon White House counsel John Dean, both Watergate veterans. I'm Brian Lehrer. Be safe, and thanks for watching.